Hey everyone, how's it going? Forrest here, again with another installment of my complete analysis of all of J.S. Bach's chorale harmonizations. Today we're looking at Warum, betrübst, dich, mein Herz, which translates to Why do you grieve, my heart? Just another harmonization of the same melody and text that we saw in yesterday's episode. This is a chorale with some interesting harmonic quirks that we're going to talk about as we get there. But let's just hop right into the analysis. We have no key signature, and we start on A minor, we end on A major. I reckon the overall tonality of this chorale is A minor. Passing tones in the lower voices here before we get C, E, E, and A, which is just A minor in first inversion. No need to reiterate the Roman numeral. Passing tone in the melody, and then we get A, E, and C, which is just taking our tonic triad and reverting it back to root position. A is a chord tone, so we don't need to mark it. And then we get E, B, A, and B. This A is a 4-3 suspension over the bass. We know that a 5 chord's being implied here, E major. And then we get C sharp fully diminished 7th. We have C sharp, B flat, G natural, and E. Interesting chromatic movement here in the alto. This would be 7-7 of 4, because C sharp's the leading tone to D, and D is our subdominant in the key of A minor. And we're getting ready for a half cadence here with a chromatic bass line from C sharp here all the way up to E. So 7-7 of 4 resolves to 4, D, A, F, and D. And Bach continues with really one of the most common ways he uses ascending chromatic bass lines by using the bass note as a secondary leading tone. This D sharp turns into the leading tone for E, D sharp, A, F sharp, and C. And this is just another 7-7 chord. In this case, it's 7-7 of 5 because D sharp is the leading tone to E, and we would expect that to resolve to some type of E chord, most likely an E major chord. E, G sharp, B, and B, which is kind of an interesting half cadence. These are relatively unusual. But moving to the next phrase, we have a very quirky progression here at the beginning of the chorale, but we end with a fairly straightforward, perfect, authentic cadence in the key of D minor. But what's happening at the beginning here, I think there's some room for debate. The melody for me, even though we're leaping up from A to E here, sounds like this D wants to resolve down to C, and subsequently sounds like we're moving to the key of C major. So even though our half cadence resolves, we have A, E, and C, which is our tonic triad in root position with a passing tone in the melody. This D minor chord feels like we're moving from A minor to C major, and it feels very specifically like the modulation is happening here on the downbeat of this measure here, the third complete measure, that is. So D minor, D, A, F, and A is 4 in the key of A minor. It's also 2 in the key of C major. And this just sounds so much like a 2-1-5 progression in the key of C major that I just can't ignore it. You could analyze this entire phrase in the key of A minor until you get to the point where you start seeing D minor ideas, which then it turns into D minor, but this just sounds too C major-like for me to ignore. So we have an instance here of a 2-1 progression. C, C, G, and E. And if you've watched my videos in the past, chances are you've encountered me talking about 2-1 progressions and how rare they are. Typically, Bach doesn't approach the tonic in the bass from above like that, and when he does, he usually doesn't harmonize it with a root position 2 chord. It's usually some type of inverted chord, like a 7-6 chord. But when we get 2-1, it is interesting. It's like a rare plagal progression, because 4-1 is very common, but 2-1 is not for some reason. There are some instances where you can analyze a progression as 2 going to 1, but usually there's some type of contrapuntal variety going on that makes the 2 chord a bit ambiguous or interpretable as another chord, usually as 7, like I was just talking about. But 2 going to 1 is really fascinating, and the progression sounds unusual. So yeah, a 2-1 progression, that's something that I've been on the lookout for in my analysis after coming to the realization that these progressions are actually kind of rare. So this is one of the handful of 2-1 progressions that exist in Bach's chorale writing. Pretty neat. But 1 takes us to 5, G, B, G, and D, this C is a 4-3 suspension over the bass, fairly common over root position dominant triads. This A is a non-chord tone as well, and I think this B, C sharp, and D is sort of starting the movement to D minor. So I'm going to actually say that this G major chord is functioning as our common chord to the key of D minor, and it's turning into the 4 in D minor via the B natural, which is the raised 6th of the D melodic minor scale. We would expect this to go to some type of 5 or 7, basically a dominant chord, and in this case we do have one. We have E, C sharp, G, and E, which I think this B is an accented non-chord tone, or happens to be the chordal 7th as well, but I think this is a 7-6 chord that you could also analyze as a 2 chord in root position, depending on what tone you consider to be a chord tone. In this case, I think 7 makes a little more sense, and this actually ties into this sort of 2 example that we had here. A lot of the times we have one of these passing tones here that changes the chord from one to the other. Like if this D minor chord had an, what would it be? If it had an, what am I trying to say? If it had a B instead of an A, it would be a B diminished chord, which would be a lot more common in this context than a D minor chord, which turns into 2 going to 1, and usually it's contextualized with like a passing tone that morphs the chord from one into the other. Like I've talked about chordal morphing in the past, the difference between a chord shifting from one into the other over the span of a beat especially, as opposed to calling this its own chord progression. I don't think one voice moving can really constitute a chord progression. That's just my experience in Bach's chorale writing. I think there definitely needs to be a distinction between one voice moving and multiple voices moving. But after our 7-6 chord, we would expect our tonic, which we get F, D, F, and A, D minor in first inversion, passing tones in the outer voices here, where we get G, B natural, D, and F. It's kind of like a passing G7 chord, so I will mark that there. We then get A major, A, E, and C sharp, which is our 5 chord, and then we cadence on D minor, D, A, F, and D, tonic triad, root position. We then get a phrase that's somewhat similar to the first phrase that we see. It does take us back to the key of A minor, and we do end with a half cadence. So I do think this D minor is going to be our common chord between the 2 keys. It'll turn into 4 in the key of A, and then we get A minor afterwards, A, E, and C, root position. We then get E, G sharp, E, and B, which is our 5 chord, E major, and then we get C, A, E, and E, which is our tonic triad in first inversion, that you could also analyze as 6-4-3. If you look at this F sharp as the root of the chord, kind of the same way that this 7-6 chord, I feel like the end of the beat is really the chord tone in the grand scheme of things, rather than it being on the downbeat. But here it just makes more sense for it to be 1. So sometimes it's interesting that the chord can be contextualized multiple ways, but it makes more normative sense when it happens on the downbeat, and sometimes it makes more normative sense when it's happening on the end of the beat. But, sorry, not the downbeat, the numbered beat. In this case, this is not the downbeat, it's just the beat where the harmonic rhythm is first encountered. But after 1-6, we see B, G sharp, and D, which is 7-6. And when we see 1-6 going to 7-6, that's G sharp diminished over B. We would expect the tonic triad and root position afterwards, which we get A, C, A, and C, 2 roots and 2 thirds, which is actually kind of a common spelling that we see in this context. But this pattern is very common in Bach, where we have 2 similar triads that are separated by an inversion, and it's bridged by a diatonic step below in first inversion. So 1-6-7-6-1. 2-6-1-6-1 or 2, things like that would be common patterns that we see in Bach, but this one's by far the most common. And then we cadence on 5. E, also a passing tone here, let's not forget that. E, G sharp, and B. Okay, moving to the next phrase, we have an interesting modulation. We go from A minor to F major, and that's a relatively rare modulation. You don't see that key relationship all that often in Bach, but we end with an imperfect authentic cadence, and Bach gets there in kind of an interesting way. So we start off with A minor in first inversion, C, E, A, and A, 1-6. Then we have some non-chord tones happening off of the beat, and when four voices are moving off of the harmonic rhythm, we know that there's, generally speaking, a subdivided chord progression going on. We have B, D, G sharp, carried from earlier in the measure, and B, which is 7-6, and again, similar to the progression that we cadenced with, we would expect our tonic triad and root position here, which we have. We have A, C, A, and C, almost exactly like the progression that we saw before. So A minor in root position, which I think is our gateway to the key of F major, becomes our 3 chord with a passing 7th in the bass. And then interestingly, we get an E flat here in the tenor, but I think that this F chord is functioning like a tonic, just maybe with a little higher function or a dual function. We have F, E flat, A, and C, which is F7. In this case, that would be 5-7 of 4. But it's still our tonic triad. It just gives it an interesting pull from A minor to B flat. If we're looking at this F7 chord as sort of a buffer in between the two keys, little passing tone here in the alto, we would expect 5-7 of 4 to go to 4, which it does. B flat, D, F, and D. Little passing 7th in the bass as well before we get G, G, B flat, and D, which is our 2 chord, G minor. Thirds-based progressions are relatively rare in Bach. Typically when we have chords that are a third apart, Bach will never go from one to the next without some type of buffer tone, or in many cases as well a buffer chord. Well, he'll inject a subdivided chord progression to separate the 2 chords, because really 4 and 2 are interchangeable in terms of their function, and mostly interchangeable with their pitch content, just because of the fact that Bach, or just because of the nature of the chords sharing more tones in common than they have different tones. So B flat is B flat, D, and F, and G minor is G, B flat, and D, so they both have B flat and D in common. They're just separated by a whole step, just like 2 and 7 are here, and we sometimes see them separated by a tone as well. But when we see them happen on separate beats of the harmonic rhythm, usually there's a buffer tone there, which I think is interesting. But after 2, we go to 5, C, G, B flat, and E. It's 5-7, C7, and then we would expect this to go to 1, which I guess technically it does, but we would expect the cadence to happen afterwards, but we get an extra beat, which sounds kind of interesting. We have C, F, A, and E, which is a particularly unusual progression. It's almost like we have a tonic triad with a 7th in first inversion, so the fact that there is the 7th in there definitely sounds particularly interesting. Maybe there's one, actually I'm going to walk that back. Maybe there is some type of tonic 6-5 going on here, but I feel like maybe we have 2 accented non-chord tones happening here. It's possible that the tonic 7th is happening, but I'm going to say that these are accented non-chord tones, and this is actually C, E, G, and E, which is just our 5 chord in root position without the 7th. So I'll just change the figured bass to reflect that. 8-5-3, and then we go to F major, F, F, A, and C in root position. Maybe there is a tonic 7th chord there, who knows, but it is kind of interesting that the melody holds on to that 7th and just skips down to C after the fact. But moving to the last phrase, we get taken back to the key of A minor, and I do think we get a brief visit to the key of C major before that. We'll go to A minor in and around sort of the F sharp going on here, which looks kind of like we're getting melodic minor, similar to what indicated that we were getting D minor here. So we start off with, I think in the key of C major, F is our 4 chord. We kind of have a theme of 4 being the chord that takes us into the new key here, all the way back in the first system, second phrase. We have 4 going to 1, C, G, C, and E. So now our tonic triad takes us to G major, G, G, B, and D. It's our 5 chord, passing 7th in the tenor, and then we get A, E, A, and C, which is A minor, which is a deceptive progression, C major terms, but I think A minor is also turning into our tonic in A minor terms, with a passing seventh in the alto as well. We then get an interesting chord here. We have D natural, F sharp, and B, which is B minor in first inversion. This is a byproduct of the melodic minor scale. It's much more common to see 4 or even 6 before we see 2 minor in a minor key, but it does happen from time to time. And then in this case, it goes to 5, like we would expect a 2/6 chord to go. We have E, D, G sharp, and B, more specifically 5/7. And then we get another deceptive progression. So we have like a chain of deceptive progressions here. We have F, C, A, and A, which is F major again. It's our 6th chord. Passing tones in the tenor in the melody, which leaves us actually with a subdivided chord progression as well. We have F, D, A, and B, which is, let's see, B minor 7 flat 5 over F. So this is the quality of a 2 chord that we would typically expect, which is diminished, not minor. But we have F natural against F sharp happening here on 2 consecutive beats. So 6 going to 2 is usually when we see 6 contextualized near a cadence. It'll usually be succeeded by 2. But after our 2 chord, we have C, E, A, and C. A minor over C, which is 1/6. Passing tone in the bass. E, G sharp, and B, which is our 5 chord, E major. Passing seventh, a delayed passing seventh in the tenor before we get A major, A, C sharp, E, and A. Bach often ends his minor chorales with major chords, with that Picardy third. It's much more common to see that than it is a minor chord, interestingly enough. But that's today's analysis. Relatively straightforward chorale, all things considered. I think it's interesting that Bach has these brief visits to C major, especially with the 2-to-1 progression there. It's interesting how 2 sort of has that plagal relationship with 1. But other than that, the chromatic bass line going on here in the first phrase is very interesting, as well as the chromaticism going on here in the alto as well. The 2-to-1 progression that I just talked about, and we've also seen a couple of mid-phrase modulations in this chorale. Typically, it's more common for Bach to modulate to a key and stay in that key until the end. It's usually done with a common chord. Sometimes we see a direct modulation, but the way that I interpret it, they're usually common chords, but there's room for argumentation there. Mid-phrase modulation is when he modulates to a key and then modulates again in the phrase and then cadences in a different key than what he started with. So we see that we have both of them occurring here in the key of C major before we modulate to another key. But other than those things, I think that's all I wanted to talk about in terms of takeaways regarding this chorale, so I'm going to cap the video off on those thoughts. If you're interested in following me along on the journey to analyze all of Bach's chorale harmonizations, feel free to subscribe to the channel. You can hit the notification icon and like the video as well if you enjoyed the content. Thank you so much for watching the video and supporting the channel by doing so. I look forward to tomorrow's analysis, and I hope you take care.